Everyone, Manu Gosain, Technical Program Director, PPO. So I just wanted to start off, I'm going to jump around in slides because there's been quite a bit of interest and we've actually had time to come up with an answer for how do proposing teams work with industry. So I'll just jump straight out there and I'm just going to jump back in. This is basically the wording straight from the RFP about industry in-kind contribution as it's been published in the RFP. As you can see, it's very high level based on the companies that are advertised on the consortium. They've put this list up, which isn't saying much, but it sort of gives you an idea of what the company expertise is, what sort of products might be available. What the PPO envisions at this stage is in the next 2 weeks, we're going to put together a list of a single technical point of contact for each of the 28 members in the industry consortium and publish that for proposers that they can reach out with multiple questions or any questions that they might have. We're also going to be looking at those questions ourselves, and if there is enough interest around a common theme, in example of Crown Castle in terms of antenna attachment rules or licensing or permitting issues that multiple proposers have, we're going to try to get a representative to conduct maybe a webinar or schedule a time with the proposers to actually understand what those processes are and what contributions that these industry sponsors can actually make. Again, to note, the proposers cannot have representatives from the consortium members on their proposals. You cannot have any listed names with companies that are on the industry consortium be listed on the proposals. That's a no-no. You can speak with them. You can have discussions today. You do not need to wait for that list. If you happen to have contacts and are curious about what these companies do or what they can do for you in a context of this power program, we caution you, though, that these companies are big. These are multinational corporations. They might or might not, each department might or might not be aware of their participation in the power industry board. So you might get information that might later on conflict with the information you'll receive from our technical point of contact. At a later stage, after final proposals are submitted, evaluated, and we have a list of finalists, the PPO will mediate a technical negotiation where you will get down to the nitty-gritty of what your vision is and how the consortium members can actually help you realize that vision. Finalists selected for reverse site visit will have this negotiation with the industry consortium members. And just to sort of whet your appetite of, a couple small examples that I just basically thought about. Don't pay attention to any of the technical jargon up there. The idea here is that if you have come up with an idea of some sort of a spectrum management application and you have an industry consortium member that actually already has a product or a service that helps you realize that vision, you're basically going to have a very easy discussion of, here is what it costs. And this is, by the way, this is happening when you're a finalist. This is not happening at the pre-proposal stage. You can have that conversations, but in terms of dollar figures and level of effort and bill of materials, all that stuff is going to happen much later on. The other extreme is going to be you're coming up with some sort of a revolutionary radio, or you're trying to put some sort of a processing that does not really exist in the expertise that currently exists in the industry consortium member. You're going to get that answer that you might have a long lead time and a dollar figure next to it. And at that time, are you willing to negotiate and live with that time frame that they've proposed, or are you willing to modify the components that might be used, or work on a different timeline or on a different component, or maybe just go outside the consortium and find somebody who might be willing to do this for you at an accelerated timescale? So just to whet that, answer that question, I hope I've clarified some of this. As I said, there will be a list that will be published in the next 2 weeks. We know May 8th is the optional date for you to submit your intent to submit a proposal. So we'll collate that and obviously condense the webinar or sharing of that information. So please, pay attention to that. So to jump back in. So I'm going to preface again, this isn't, I'm looking at Rudra, this is not going to be any examples that I'm going to be putting up here, just because we want to be careful about what's being what's being communicated has to be sort of a blank slate whiteboard, which the people in this room, there's enough expertise, way more than I have up here, to come up with the vision and the technical vision for what these power platforms will be. But the idea here is to look at some focus areas and technologies that are all of interest in the community. This is the feedback NSF has received. Industry Consortium has put a lot of thought into it. So these are some of the areas that are envisioned, but obviously are not limited to, that will be enabled as part of the platform. Just to touch back again, I apologize for keep singling you out, Rudra, but you had this question about innovation and stability and having a breadth of expertise across multiple areas and versus focusing on a single research area. Again, there is no prescription of what could be envisioned. If you have a platform proposal that focuses on multiple research focus areas, but you still touch on the key points in the merit review criteria, that's going to be considered as a value add. You could have a very single focus, but you also will have to justify that, because the second merit review criteria of engaging the research community is going to force you to justify that why am I only focusing on one particular area. And if there is enough interest from the research community and you're able to convince in your proposal that that's the case, that's valid as well. So I foresee some sort of different spectrums here, and listening to all the talks earlier on in the teaming talk session, I think there's a quite nice mix, and I think each approach is extremely valuable and has a nice approach. So basically, this was a question that came up earlier about what exactly is this platform, and what, as the PPO, what we've tried to define is what we like to call a power site. This is, at its most basic level, the physical instantiation of a wireless substrate. Could be RF, baseband, fronthaul technologies, or you could have from the RF all the way back into the cloud. So the idea is we're not just envisioning the coolest, most capable radio out there, but you have to have an end-to-end ecosystem that supports not just the RF and the wireless capabilities, which are extremely important. And trust me, these are words, if you really were to do a deep dive, each of these bullet points could be an hour-long session each. But the idea here is just to get to the point that these are really high-level ideas of what the elements of a power platform, might have. So out of baseband, the idea of programmability, it's a key tenet or guiding principle of power. So the ability to have something that's out there. A lot of these technologies do exist. A lot of these are being envisioned. And I think there's a great opportunity here to come up with something really, truly visionary that'll be useful and applicable in the next 5 to 7 years. Wireless fiber backhaul, I was very interested, excited to actually hear about companies and university expertise in the area, because this is something that's obviously been considered really important by not only industry, but by also academia. So backhaul, fronthaul technologies could be, fixed wireless, millimeter wave, things like that. Then we get into the edge side, which is another really cool area of research, which is edge infrastructure. And this is where we get into software configurability, SDN, NFV kind of principles. This is something that's been well investigated. It's pretty mature, but its applicability in the context of wireless networks and a wireless ecosystem is something that's obviously been explored for a while, and there's still a lot of work to be done. So building an end-to-end system where you have programmable wireless substrate in the form of RF and baseband, and you have the ability to control as many knobs as you might have. So you have support for a large heterogeneity of experiments and research. And then the ability to actually have some of that control and capability exist on the backhaul and fronthaul channels if you're not doing any sort of processing at the RF front end. One of the things is, as you're thinking about your architecture, this was brought about earlier by the industry panel talks, was the idea of modular hardware, extensibility, and the ability for BYOD, which is bring your own device. This would be something that'll be important, because remember that these platforms have 50% of their time for industry research as well. industry is going to be very keen on using these power platforms with the work that they're actually doing. So the ability for this architecture to have an extensible platform and architecture which actually supports bringing in devices from the outside and having sort of a system integration role, that's going to be important. Last but definitely not the least is the user equipment side. The UEs are going to be key. Certain platforms may move in directions of very, very high mobility. I think we heard a couple of different ideas floated around connected and smart vehicle and smart transport. Mobility is really, really key. It's a really hot topic. It's a big deal in industry, and that's as well as in academia. And how do we support that? User equipment is going to be key. What the guidance is to actually think about white box, which is the ability to actually have programmability and some sort of open source components built into the user equipment side of things, versus also having some standard off the shelf commercial black box equipment be available. A piece that I'd like to just touch on before I dive into the numbers that are on the right side from the RFP is that the equipment, the white box, black box approach also is going to be really, really key as you build the tools that are going to be useful for the equipment as it's going to be supported in the architecture. The usability of these tools for white box and black box is going to be something that actually brings the usability of power outside of just the power platform. So if you're building tools that can be used in a context outside of power, you actually have a better story of sustaining interoperability and things of that nature. So with that sort of a timeline, and again, I purposely didn't try to draw out a timeline because the idea here is not to give out specific numbers, because that's not how the evaluation is going to happen. But this is a general sense, and feel free to, these numbers are again just guidance of what sort of a scale is Power expecting to support and deploy. So 10 to 20 different sites, and as I said, the site itself is not just RF, but it also includes the local compute, or what you might want to call edge clouds or central data clouds or big data or whatever kinds of different applications that you might think on the edge side and the core network side. That's also considered a site. The idea is that, as I previously in the earlier session talked about the timeline, and the timeline is going to be for deployment mid to late 2018. This is when you're going to start thinking about where you're going to put up these sites. You have to think about the feasibility, and this is where the incremental modular approach happens, because if you have things that are readily accessible, the assets are owned and controlled by the community and or the university, you have a much higher likelihood and a much faster time to bring these assets and these sites up, which are going to be available for research, and then you sort of incrementally build on top. We do have, we would like to see or push the proposers to think about bringing all the implementation of the site, so whatever number it is that you're proposing, to be operational by the third year of award date. The idea is that as you're working out the kinks and you're learning by doing, there has to be a stage where you're going to have things deployed where you then have time to actually play with this, not just yourself, but also open it up to the entire ecosystem for doing your research. And then as you're doing this, you also then have time to start thinking about what's going to happen next. So this is where the extensibility piece fits into the architecture of a power platform. This is again only required for finalists. You start thinking about this at the full proposal stage, but this is the power deployment plan, which is going to be part of the bigger the platform development plan. Is going to be the master plan, and then you have the platform deployment plan and the platform operations plan, part of the master document. So this is the section that's going to describe at some level in the full proposal activities, budget, schedules for design, deployment, operation of activities. Again, some sort of guiding principles and things to consider. is the deployment size is going to be proportional to the time you're going to become operational. So if you have distributed islands where you're going to have to do the legwork bottom up each time you're bringing up a site, that time's going to become that timeline is going to get pushed out, and the proposers will have to consider that as they evaluate. This is something that I touched upon in terms of how many radio sites. This was a question that was addressed earlier about co-location, number of sites located together. I think significance of topology is enabled for whatever applications or proposed research areas you're working on. That's going to be important. Incremental deployment schedule, I've already touched on that. One thing that, and again, I know I'm talking to a wide variety of people who wear different hats. So if you already do know this, it's great. But for some people who are all sort of starting out, a couple of those, sort of gotchas are really planning for operational expenses, not just the coolest, shiniest object and equipment that the money can buy, but the idea is you need to run this and maintain this for 5 years. So you need to budget that accordingly. A concept that was mentioned, and again, without sounding too prescriptive, the idea of sharing, slicing, time, geographical resource is going to be extremely important, not only at the wireless front end, but also at the edge and the core. And basically having that sliceability be a key tenant, time, geographic, or resource based, is going to be important. And that's obviously going to have an impact on how you're going to deploy some of these technologies and platforms. The platform operations plan, this is again the second component of the deployment plan. This is where the nitty-gritty actually happens of how these platforms, once they're up and deployed, are going to be operated. And this is where I think a lot of the academic innovation piece is actually going to need help from people who do this. Researchers and innovators are probably not the right constituency to do this, and this is where budgeting for the personnel comes into play. But the kinds of things that you're thinking about is setting up some sort of capabilities that mimic some sort of operations centers. This is going to be something that's going to sort of think about, I have this distributed large-scale deployment. How am I managing this? Who's going to do the day-to-day? Who's going to swap out the radio? If the antenna gets moved, or some other natural event occurs, who's going to go out and fix that? You have to have a dedicated plan for that. They're also going to be, the operations staff is obviously going to be the front or the leading people who are going to be doing compliance and maintenance. We've heard some of the rules that the FCC had highlighted today. Some of those things can be automated, but a lot of these still might need some manual intervention, point of contacts, escalation procedures. Things will have to be thought through here. And again, academic researchers themselves may or may not do that. The key, which is again, I want to just tie this back into a bridge we were talking about between community and academics. The academic researchers and the operational staff, you have to treat them as an asset. The operational team is going to be the lead users and the platform experts for the platforms that you're going to develop. The innovation and the vision that you have that needs to be translated into reality, you need buy-in from this operational staff. So they need to be part of the discussion from day zero. Planning them later on or bringing them on board is probably just going to lead to more work on your end, because there's going to be a long learning curve that the staff is going to need. If you have these people be lead users and platform experts, not only are you going to get some really cool insights about platform and technologies, you're also going to get a really good response for the experimenters who are going to be using these platforms. These are going to be our frontline people. These are really important people to have and to think about and budget. So that's that about design, deployment, and operations. I'm going to move the discussion a little bit towards the services framework. At the end of the day, you have hardware that's out there that's been deployed in the field, and this needs to be usable. There needs to be some way of advertising it to a remote user because a key tenet of Power is going to be remote and on-demand experimentation. And again, I'm just trying to be cautious here in terms of not prescribing anything, but just trying to keep things extremely at an abstract level. The idea is at a high level, a Power Platform is going to be supporting user services, core services, and some experimental services. Core services are things that you have to think are up and running on day one, without which your Power Platform is just has no use to neither to you nor to an external experimenter. User services are services that you might have application developers who might be interested in working on some of the technologies, but they might not care about the latest and greatest stuff that's happening in the wireless domain, but they might be interested in developing some applications and services. And there are plenty of examples out there that actually do that, that people should look out for. Experimental services, at the end of the day, this is advancing fundamental research, and services have to be a key part of it. So you need to be enabling experimental services on top of this framework as well. These could be things that you develop, these could be things that your partners might develop, or these could be things that external developers might be enabled through providing the right interfaces and providing the right abstractions and resource models that you're going to come up with. The SDK, which is sort of abstracting away the physical resources from what's available to people at the layer above them, have been defined as both for software and for services. So the SDK stands either for software development or service development. And then what are the actual physical and virtual resources? At the bottom layer, you have wireless, which is obviously the main key component. That's why it gets a bigger chunk of the real estate here. Optical technologies are very, very important, given that fiber deployments have been touted by pretty much each team that stood up here. So that's something that needs to be explored in the context of the Power Platform as well. And HPC, high performance compute, local edge clouds or central data aggregate clouds. This is the actual resource that's going to be tied in and then abstracted at some level with different frameworks that the Power proposers are going to come up with. Data is going to be key. Data models, different sort of management ideas. This is all sort of the bucket list. So again, if you are someone who hasn't done this and sort of are getting a little fidgety and finicky here, so the next slide might sort of alleviate some of that stress. The idea is that the PPO, given that the vision here is to have 4 platforms over the course of 5 years, believe it or not, all as disparate or different the services or the enabling ideas that these platforms might envision, there's going to be a set of core services that are going to be required. And the PPO is going to be the place that's going to manage those core services for all the platforms. So there's going to be a shared services model where the services such as, and again, completely not an exhaustive list. This is something that's been published as part of the other information in the RFP. There is a long list. Again, even that is not completely exhaustive because the experts in this room are going to come up with different kinds of things. But we've provided some guidance to begin thinking about it. What we are thinking about, what the PPO is going to start working on, and we have some experience with different NSF large-scale distributed programs and also the industry expertise that we have as part of the consortium, is to provide account and identity management, spectrum use coordination. So we obviously will be working very closely with the FCC and those licensing ideas to sort of think about how can we streamline and centralize that process. So we reduce the burden because we know that the FCC now has a short staff. So how do we actually do that? The PPO is going to be that place that interfaces with the FCC to streamline some of these processes. Experimental lifecycle management. So we're going to publish what we are calling playbooks, which are basically end-to-end user lifecycle management processes for what we envision Power Platforms to be. So 50% research use, 50% industry use. As you know, these are different users who might or might not have the same concept of what a platform is or what remote or on-demand experimentation might look like. So the PPO is going to define some of that. Namespace and data model management, given that there's going to be a heterogeneity of data that's going to be collected from the RF end to the work that's going to be done on the local edge clouds, there has to be some consistency across the platforms. There's going to be some differences, but there has to be a set of common APIs and models that are going to be developed, and the PPO is going to work on that. I think there were questions about federation or interoperability, which was a key principle. And the idea is the PPO is obviously going to be working with different NSF investments that have been made and future NSF investments, as well as industry partnerships. So industry also operates their test beds for their research. So there might be opportunities for interoperability or interfacing, and the PPO is going to work on that. I'm just going to point out the language which is in the RFP, where in the full proposal writing state, so after your encourage or discourage goes out, given where you fall on that spectrum of these services and your understanding of these services framework, you're going to have a discussion with the PPO of where the implementation work is going to take place. And if you are experts who run frameworks and large distributed test beds and have that expertise, great, that's a bunch of work that happens on your end. But if you are cities and communities or academic researchers who basically lack that capability, please don't feel that other teams might have a leg up on you. The PPO is going to fill in some of those gaps given the expertise we bring into the room from our past experiences. So that's sort of about the PPO shared services. Again, cannot stress enough about the key personnel. I think I've sort of hammered this point home as much as I can, so I'm going to skip over this slide. And I think I've gone over the industry in kind, and I think these are, please, contact information for all of the members of the PPO. Any technical questions you might have, you can address to me and my colleagues. All the information is listed here. So please, with that, we'll move on to the next part. Thank you.